All right, for this session, I wanted to go over a filtering process, and this is my weekly routine. So currently, we are at the start of the new week on Sunday evening for me, and we are going to look at some potential interesting pairs, interesting instruments as well. And then throughout the week, I'm going to filter them down again. So this is how I would start off the week. First things first, I'm going to look on the left side of the screen. I'm going to look at the economic calendar right there. So we have US dollar red folder news on Monday. It's not of the big three, so that is perfect. That can potentially already mean that Monday right there for the US dollar is very interesting to potentially look for trade ID if price aligns with that ID as well. Tuesday, GBP news, Canadian dollar, CPI there as well. New Zealand dollar CPI, GBP CPI right there as well. So more GBP news as well. All right. For CPI, by the way, I have had some stories as well that people get slipped really bad with CPI, even if it's on the crosses. Personally, I have no real, I don't get slipped that bad on crosses on CPI, but that could also be if I'm mainly trading on my broker and when I'm mainly trading on my broker, because then I don't really get slipped. But prop firms, and the thing with prop firms is if they have their own in-house broker, usually what is the case is they can also, very simply said, very plainly said, they can determine how much slippage someone gets on average. So very, very sneaky, very dirty as well, but it is what it is. So that is why some people have probably experienced as well a lot of slippage when it comes to CPI on the crosses right there. So if that's the case, and if you're our general rule of thumb, if you're trading a prop firm challenge for CFDs, Forex, of course, then just simply said avoid CPI for even the cross as well and trade after them, I would argue. Now, moving on Wednesday, some more GBP news as well, GBP CPI, US dollar, orange folder news actually, FOMC member master speaks right there. FOMC member speaking it's all right. It's not too bad. It is definitely trading. So Fed Chair Powell speaking right there, that's perfectly fine. Australian dollar employment change right there. Okay, so that means Wednesday and Thursday could be interesting for Australian dollar as well. Thursday, unemployment claims right there for the US dollar, and Friday GBP. So the main takeaway right here is that we mainly have Australian dollar, which is only 2 days. Then we have GBP, is quite a lot of news as well, and US dollar is quite a lot of news. So mainly GBP and the US dollar right there. That's my main focus. So the reason why I want to take that into account is if we don't have a lot of news for a specific pair. So for example, Canadian dollar. So Canadian dollar CHF, for example, only has news on that Tuesday right there. That's where I'm personally not really eager to get involved unless we have such clean price action on that pair where we can wait for a specific day to trade that. Otherwise, I just mainly look at the pairs that have the most volatility throughout the week. I like that the most. Now, right here, let's then take a look and let's remind ourselves of the economic calendar later on, right there. So keep it on the left. Let's take a look at the dollar. What are we dealing with? On the US dollar itself, we are continuing higher right now, and we can currently say that we are actually running this high right there, so not sweeping it anymore. On the weekly right here, we are in the third candle of a weekly value gap right there. Now, the thing here is that we don't have resistance anymore towards the left. So this can already be potentially a weekly breakaway gap as well, where we can already look to continue higher. So on the daily, ideally I would want to wait for a daily fair value gap. Unless the draw liquidity is very close, very clear, then we can potentially already dive into the 4-hour. But here I would want to wait for a daily fair value gap to potentially continue higher off that. But we do have a lot of volatility coming in on Monday for the US dollar. So this might also become a breakaway gap. So we would have to react right there on the next day as well. So after Monday, we would have to react and see what we want to do. Now, moving on and definitely saying, okay, the draw liquidity is very clear on the dollar. The narrative is a little bit tricky, not 100% certain just yet. With that being said, let's move on to the indices. Now, the indices right here, and Russell, we just came below right there, that weekly swing low. Now here, we are also in the third candle creation. We can definitely continue lower based on what the dollar is also doing. We don't really have a clear premium rate that we can continue lower from. You can see I've marked out the daily value gap right there, but that daily value gap in itself is also not super interesting because that is quite a big retracement to make if we do want to continue lower. So I am not super interested in that right now. Moving on to ES. Yes, also one big consolidation right here. If we take a look at this, we have a weekly value gap right there, which we're trading into, could act as resistance. So this next low, the previous week low, that's definitely a nice target. But we don't have a clear premium area we can continue lower from. For filtering process wise, indices I'm also quite easy on. As in, I go over it quite fast right here, and a 4 hour, not something I'm specifically looking at for the indices as well. For flow trading plan, yes, it's a little bit different. It's a different video as well. So for flow trading plan, this could be very interesting to look at lower prices right there. Filtering process wise, where we actually rely on sort of a higher time frame trend, I'm not super interested in that personally. Nasdaq right here, daily as well, consolidating price action. So be picky, right? Even I don't need to go into the monthly right there. If I open the chart right here already, just looking at a daily consolidation, I don't want to do anything. Even if the monthly drawn liquidity might very well be extremely clean, I don't want to do anything just purely based on the daily consolidation. YM right here. YM is actually some sort of a trend right here with order flow confirmed lower as well. So on the monthly, we have a monthly value gap right there. Small monthly value gap, which we can target. Weekly right here, we have a weekly swing low. The only thing is that we do not have a clear premium rate just yet, which we can continue lower from. This daily value gap right there is still in the making. So still 21 hours away, 22 hours actually. And it could just already deliver lower before we actually might get the daily value gap. So right here for flow trading plan, again, could be quite interesting. Filtering process. Mwah. DAX. Let's see. DAX, do we have anything interesting? Weekly right there. Is there anything interesting? Not really. We can continue lower, but again, not a clear premium rate we can continue lower from. Now we get into the more interesting part, because Australian dollar, US dollar, first Forex major right there. Monthly swing low, which we can target. It's quite a simple target right there. Weekly swing low as well. We have a weekly value gap in the making. Now that weekly value gap in the making does not worry me a little bit. As in, if it does not get created, if it does get created, both scenarios don't worry me a little bit. Reason why, even if we retrace back into that and we do not create that weekly value gap, I'm okay with that. Because it's not a lot of area. It's not a lot of room that it can actually create the weekly value gap right there. So if it does not create it, immediately continues lower, perfectly fine in my eyes. Here, if we do create that weekly value gap, I believe we're going to create that weekly value gap already before we reach that, or after we reach the drawn liquidity right there. So we reach the drawn liquidity first, and then after we might create the weekly value gap. So that leads me to think the daily could be more interesting. The daily value gap right there could be more interesting. But we do have a lot of volatility as well coming in on Monday. So this right here, with no resistance source left anymore, could already be a breakaway gap to continue lower instead. So on the 4 hour, if we're talking about a hybrid trader, this for me could definitely be quite interesting right now. Fair value area, 4 hour value gap, to continue lower off of that already. So that is definitely something that is quite high on my interest list heading into Monday. So this is definitely interesting right here. EU, let's see. EU, we have just reached this monthly swing low right there. Then on the weekly, what do we see? Nothing really interesting. Weekly fair value gap potentially in the making as well. Daily, we have reached, or we are about to reach a daily fair value gap right there. Now, the reason I've marked that out all the way towards the left is because we are not really reaching anything significant anymore. Meaning we have the next target, a monthly swing low right there, which is quite far. So I want to be quite picky about how far we can actually still continue lower, which is where this daily value comes in. Do not want to trade off of that, but it's quite an easy target right there. It's a good target. Here, the premium array that we can continue lower from, I personally would want to see a daily value gap ideally. And the reason I mention that is because here we don't have that clear, very close target towards that like Australian dollar, US dollar right there. So yes, we can already continue lower potentially, but the 4 hour value gap is a little bit more random to me. I personally would want to wait for a daily value gap instead. So I'm going to add it to the list because the drawn liquidity is quite clear. Overall narrative could be quite clear, but Australian dollar, US dollar is still more interesting to me. GBP, US dollar, let's see. What are we doing? We have reached that monthly fair value gap right there. That is of course resistance. So take that into account. That we have also this weekly order block that we've also reached. Also resistance. So we're running into quite some resistance. Ideally, of course, we want to get involved before we reach that monthly fair value gap right there. And the monthly fair value gap is this low. Now it's getting a little bit more tricky. So here, I am not too eager to get involved anymore. If we want to continue lower, I would want to see a little bit more signs again. Based on the dollar, the US dollar alone, so the DXY, we can still look to continue lower right here on GU. But I would want, again, a little bit more clear signs. It's interesting, but I'm waiting a little bit. New Zealand dollar, US dollar. Let's see. What are we doing? Potentially reaching lower for the monthly swing low right there as well. Weekly swing low, which is a little bit closer, so an easier target. Daily right here, just reached these lows right there. So we can also potentially continue lower off this daily fair value gap that we have right there. It's in the making. So here, if we already continue lower, then I personally would already want to see a new daily fair value gap or new 4-hour fair value gaps right there lower. If we're talking about a hybrid trader right there. The closer we get to the weekly swing low, the better as well. So here it has the potential. Again, the narrative is just not super clear. So I would want to wait a little bit. US dollar, Canadian dollar, and New Zealand dollar, US dollar, by the way, if we already want to continue lower, then this 4-hour value gap right there, if we get enough confirmation to continue lower of that, could again be quite interesting. Fair value area, fair value gap right there, could be quite interesting. US dollar, Canadian dollar, let's see. Monthly right here, we can continue higher towards that monthly swing high right there. Weekly, what are we doing? Weekly, still the weekly swing high as well. Do you have anything interesting on the daily? Weekly, we don't have any resistance anymore, so we could just create a weekly breakaway gap instead to already continue higher off of this candle, the third candle right there. So on the daily right here, on the daily, what are we doing? We've just reached a few swing highs towards the left. Ideally, I would want to wait for the daily value gap to be created to then potentially continue higher off of that already as well. So it has potential. I'm going to add it to the waiting list instead because I want to wait for the daily value gap to be created in this scenario. US dollar CHF. Let's see. Again, reach that weekly swing high. Let's look at the monthly first. Monthly swing high is the next target potentially. Weekly swing high earlier reached as well. Then weekly swing high next as well. Daily right here. Ooh. Drawn liquidity quite clear. Not a clear narrative though. This value gap is too big of a retracement to make if we do want to continue higher. So I'm not expecting a retracement towards that right there. And if we do retrace into that, I'm not interested in it. So here, 4 hours is not even that clean. So here I would want to wait for a new clear fair value gap to be created to potentially trade off of that. In the meantime, I would want to wait. I'm going to add it to the waiting list. US dollar JPY at an all-time high. So whenever a pair or an instrument is at an all-time high during the filtering process, I immediately move on. And the reason for that is because we can't pinpoint our target anymore towards the left right there. And when that is the case, feels like I'm trading a little bit in the middle of nowhere. I'm not confident enough to take a trade right there to look for longs, for example. It feels like we're either chasing price or trying to call a top in the market. And neither of those is something I would want to do. So simply said, I move on because filtering process, there's enough pairs that are most likely also going to be interesting. Silver and gold, similar to the indices on this list right here, is not necessarily something that I'm actively looking to trade for a filtering process, if I'm being honest. So right here, if we take a look at the monthly, we have reached those swing highs towards the left, which might seem like we're sweeping right there. On the weekly, if we do want to reach lower, we can reach for that weekly fair value gap right there. On a daily, quite early still. We have been continuing higher, so I'm not too eager to look for shorts just yet. If we do want to continue lower, then ideally confirming order flow of that 4-hour value gap to continue lower off that, that could be quite interesting towards that weekly value gap and seeing what we do with that weekly value gap again. Then gold right here, you can see a very similar scenario at an all-time high. So all-time high, again, not super interesting. If we do want to continue lower, we have that weekly value gap we can potentially target. And on the 4-hour, we have this 4-hour value gap, 4-hour sharp turn, we can potentially continue lower off as well. But again, we are at an all-time high. We have been continuing high for a very long time as well. So I do not want to call top just yet. I want to be confident about that top. So ideally confirm order flow to then continue lower off of that. I want to wait. Bitcoin, let's see. Bitcoin on the monthly, we have a monthly fair value gap right there, which we can potentially push higher from as well. And on the weekly, we are, if we do want to already sweep the swing low to continue higher, and on the daily, I would like to see a daily fair value gap higher right there. And on the 4 hour, if we do want to continue lower, we have this 4 hour value gap, but currently it's in one big consolidation. So I personally would want to wait a little bit right here. Want to wait. Crude oil. Now this one is definitely quite interesting. Take a look at the monthly. We can just look to continue higher. This line that I have right there is a weekly swing high sitting right there, which we can potentially look to target. We are running into some resistance right here. And because we run into some resistance, this 2 candle rejection right here could eventually fill. And we could look to target higher right there after we come into that weekly value gap, because we are rejecting a little bit. So there's momentum coming into the weekly value gap to then continue higher off of that. That could be very interesting. And that is what I'm going to wait for personally. So this is actually looking quite interesting. I do like that. I'm going to add it to the long list right there. I'm going to add it to the waiting list. And mainly, and the reason why I switched this from the long list to the waiting list is because I'm still waiting for it to deliver into that weekly value gap. So since it's a weekly value gap, it might take a while before it delivers into that. So I personally want to wait for that. Here, if we already continue higher with a daily value gap, then I would, again, then I'll react and I'll get involved most likely off of that already. Bank Nifty, also at an all-time high. So here, not eager to get involved or do anything. Now we move on to the crosses. And with the crosses, excuse me, let's see. We had major, mainly GBP news, and then we had some US dollar news, GBP news again, news in dollar, Australian dollar right there. Mainly GBP and Australian dollar. That's the main things I'm going to look at. So the reason why I mentioned that, and the reason why it's important, again, if there is a lot of volatility for a certain pair throughout the week, then I'll give it more opportunities. So I'm not against the idea of waiting a little bit because it does have a lot of volatility. So I'm more loose with the price action that we had. Where if we don't have a lot of volatility, so not a lot of economic calendar news events, not a lot of days where we have volatile days for that pair throughout the week, then I am a little bit more strict on the price action. So that's also what you'll see right here. Now, first thing, Australian dollar, Canadian dollar. So we have new supporting ID. Perfect. Let's see. We have on the weekly a potential swing high that we are sweeping to remove a few drawings. Monthly, previous month's high as well. Daily, coming against that fair value area right there. 2 candle rejection already failing. I'm not too eager to get involved right here. I want to skip it. Not interested. Australian dollar CHF. What are we doing? We came above this monthly swing high right there. Potentially creating a third candle right there, or it is creating a third candle. Monthly fair value gap potentially in the making. Then on the weekly, what are we doing? A weekly fair value area that we are running into right there. So on the daily, do we have anything interesting? Nested with an order block right there on the daily as well. So if we do want to continue higher, then failing to create this daily value gap lower, 2 candle rejection right now could be quite interesting. Could definitely be quite interesting. I'm going to add it to the waiting list because it's still in an early stage. So I would want to wait for a new clear daily discount rate to trade off of. Unless we already disrespect this daily value gap right there, and we do not create that, then the 4 hour could also be quite interesting. We'll see. We will see. Australian dollar JPY. Let's see, what do we have? On a monthly, it's an all-time high. No, it's not. Monthly, not too clear. Weekly, also not too clear right here. Daily, could argue that it's quite similar to Australian dollar CHF, where we have this fair value area. We do have this fair value gap right there below it. I do not necessarily like that. I feel like I'm forcing an ID, so I'm not going to do anything right here. Australian dollar, New Zealand dollar. Let's see. What are we doing? Monthly, swing high reached right there. On a weekly, if we want to continue higher, we can already continue higher off of this weekly fair value gap right there. We see first candle is not necessarily a big rejection. So this previous week low right there could be reached, especially since we do not create a daily value gap higher just yet. Could be swept right there to then continue higher off of that. Could be quite interesting. I'm going to add it to the waiting list because it's still quite early, still quite premature. So here I'm going to wait. And again, could be quite interesting later on, potentially. Canadian dollar CHF. So now we get into a sort of into pairs where we only have, well, Canadian dollar mainly one trading day right there where we can potentially look for a trade ID. So that already and automatically as well, I don't necessarily like that. So then I would want a lot of a really clear price action. And if we do not have that, then I'm not interested to get involved. Canadian dollar CHF, monthly third candle, weekly right here, daily right here. It can potentially, I can see it continue higher right here because we're taking out the resistance areas. If we get a daily Verwijk higher, could be quite interesting right there. But it's mainly going to be interesting most likely next week. Because if we do want to create a daily Verwijk right there, then this candle would need to be a big expansion candle right there. Tuesday would need to close, and Tuesday is the day we actually have the volatility. So I'm not too eager to get involved. I'm not going to do anything. All right, Canadian dollar JPY. Monthly, not too clear. Weekly Verwijk gap. Okay, so that's also always quite interesting. Daily right here. Can we potentially look to continue higher? If we can fail to create that daily Verwijk gap, I would be willing to go into the 4 hour as well to look at 4 hour order flow right here to potentially continue higher off of that. That could be quite interesting for Tuesday. So here, the price action is interesting enough to potentially look at it on a Tuesday. So I'm going to add it to the waiting list as well. CHF JPY, no news, not doing anything. Euro Australian dollar, we have potentially Wednesday and Thursday. So potentially there's something interesting, but this has been one big consolidation. And what you'll notice when you start doing filtering process as well, more on your side, then you'll start to notice that you'll remember pairs. So for example, I also remember that Euro GBP has been one big consolidation for a very long amount of time. So if it's still consolidating, just simply move on. For crosses, you definitely want to be more picky than on US dollar pairs, because crosses also have usually a lack of volatility. So they need to be either very clean or just move on. Euro Canadian dollar right here. We have Canadian dollar news on Tuesday, but this has been one big consolidation as well. Verwijk gaps are not following through with new Verwijk gaps, so I do not want to do anything right here. Euro CHF, no new support ID, so I'm going to move on already. Euro GBP, consolidating price action, move on. Euro JPY, let's see. No Euro and no JPY news actually, so I move on. Euro New Zealand dollar. We reached into that weekly fair value area right there, weekly fair value gap. Daily right here had a nice 2 candle rejection, but did not continue higher. We only have one news day, which is CPI right there for New Zealand dollar on Tuesday. And again, I'm not interested in trading that. GBP Australian dollar. Let's see. On the monthly, not the clearest. Weekly, potentially sweeping these swing lows right there to continue higher. That could be quite interesting. On daily, what do we have? We're running into this resistance. The 2 candle rejection has early signs of potentially failing right there. So that's good. We have this daily Verwijk gap as well. Also really good. Now that daily Verwijk gap is not something I would want to trade off of. Ideally, I would want to wait for a new daily Verwijk gap higher right there to then look for higher prices as well. So this definitely could be very interesting. I'm going to add this to the waiting list right here. GBP Canadian dollar. Let's see. On the monthly, potentially sweeping that swing high. Weekly right here. If we want to continue lower after that sweep, we can continue lower after that weekly Verwijk gap right there. We already have a rejection, so we should ideally not continue higher very far. So here on the daily, we do not have a daily Verwijk gap just yet. We are coming off of weekly context already. So even the 4 hour right here to continue lower off that could already be very interesting actually. New 4 hour Verwijk gaps right there are also quite interesting to look at lower prices. So this is definitely quite early on actually already very interesting. I'm still going to add to the waiting list because news for GBP Canadian dollar right there comes in on Tuesday. GBP JPY. Let's see, monthly. Again, monthly is not too clear. Weekly, we came into this weekly Verwijk gap right there, which we could have continued higher from, and we already had a rejection the previous week. So here we swept the previous week low to then again potentially continue higher. Now, Since we have a lot of GBP news, I am willing to give this a little bit more time to develop. Since last week, it could have been a scenario where we didn't have enough volatility to push higher. So now if we do have enough volatility to then sweep this low to then continue higher, that could be quite interesting. So here, I want to monitor if this daily vertical gap right there gets created. If it doesn't, could already be interesting to go into the 4 hour. If it does, I would ideally want to wait for the daily to disrespect the daily value gap to then continue higher off that. I'm going to add it to the waiting list. GBP, New Zealand dollar, let's see. Monthly, not too clear again. Weekly, fair value area right there. And definitely fair value area we can continue higher off of. So last week we did not continue higher off the fair value area just yet. And the daily value gap though did not create a new daily value gap lower. Again, it might have been a scenario where we do not have enough volatility to push higher just yet. So a week like this, where we do have a lot of GBP news, and we also have New Zealand dollar news actually, this could be quite interesting to actually look to continue higher. I would want to wait for daily fair value gap personally to continue higher off of that. Could be very interesting. New Zealand dollar CHF, monthly, not that clear. Ooh, weekly, just one big consolidation. And the daily as well right there. I'm not interested in this. New Zealand dollar JPY right here. This has also been one bigger consolidation. I do not necessarily want to get involved in that, and I do not like that personally. So this is going to be the waiting list for me right here. A lot on the waiting list currently, which of course throughout the week I will just filter down. Then for the short list, so what is already interesting potentially tomorrow, that is Australian dollar, US dollar mainly. Right there, because it still had that clear drawn liquidity. So if I'm interested in trading anything, it's going to be Australian dollar, US dollar mainly right there. EU, GU, not necessarily. Same for New Zealand dollar, US dollar as well, not necessarily. So that is how I approach the filtering process. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense as well. And throughout the week, of course, you can follow the forecast videos where we filter down this list.